everybody, welcome to Crowdsurfing. This is a show where we talk about Kickstarter and the different games that are on Kickstarter. So, hey, it's kind of I don't know if this isn't the hottest month to do Kickstarters. That's usually March or April. The big Kickstarters go off during that time here. So now we're getting to June. We're getting to convention season. So there's not as many big name games on Kickstarter. There's some, but there's definitely a ton out there. Unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot more dross than normal. When I was going through the list to go through and see which Kickstarters to talk about today, I was like, nope. There's so many ones that are not that interesting. But I found some that are, and let's talk about them. Okay, so first we'll take a look at the King of Con. I almost said the King of Con. That's like the movie The King of Con, but the King of Con. This is for people who go to cons and buy stuff. You're an impulsive buyer. You're going to a con trying to get all the things. Different vendors have stuff and you buy it. Now that's going to ring true to people who go to cons. I mean, like when I go to a con, whatever con it might be, I'm like, ooh, what can there be? And people run in there to buy things. I'm not sure how long this theme will hold off, but the artwork's funny and silly, with monkeys and stuff going to cons and all. But it's in Italian, but it looks like everything is language independent. 1 Week Ultimate Werewolf from Bezier Games is out. This is like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, and it's 5 times as long. That's really, there's more to it than that. There's a board, you're moving pieces around, you're switching things around, and I've had a chance to play it. It's much more convoluted. I guess convoluted is a strong word. It's not like it's a complex game than the original game was. The original game, you did a few things, you woke up and you did it. Here you do a few things, you wake up, you move some pieces, you go back to sleep, and you do that 5 times in a row, and then you find out who's the werewolf, etc. Block by Block. This is the second edition of the game. The first edition was not Kickstarted. I saw a couple years ago. This is like you're insurrectionists, whether you're students or prisoners or disenfranchised people, but it's like really silly, right? This is not a serious game, although the theme could be very serious, and you are just trying to control and start your own little insurrection in a city. Post-Human Saga. This is an interesting style game. You're going to go earn your keep to stay in a colony. As a post-apocalyptic, you're in this colony. You need to earn your spot there, so you're going to go out. Lots of pieces. This is a very big, grandiose style game. I hope it's as good as it looks. My pick of the week is from Academy Games. This is their first one I've seen in a while where it's not really like a war-style game. This is Tudor. This is a worker placement style game. And I've done a lot of great games, 1775 and things like that. But this one here, you're placing workers in different spots. You can send people to rooms, but that room doesn't even go off unless there's a lord attending that room. So there's some interesting ideas here. Has those really funky hand pieces where you're going to be putting rings on them. I really like the look of this, and Academy does a great job at bringing history to life. Herbaceous Sprouts. This is a dice game. It's a sequel to Herbaceous from the same designers, Steve Finn and then Eduardo Baraf. And then, of course, fantastic artwork from Beth Sobel. This game looks super pretty. It's rolling dice and planting herbs and things like that. A lot of people said a lot of good things about the first one, so I'm assuming the sequel will also be good. Free League Company is making a game called Crusader Kings Lead Your Destiny. Now, I looked at the other projects because they've done several of them, and it looks like they've mostly done RPGs. This game is a mix of an RPG with a board game. As your typical, when I look at the map, it's like, oh, look, another map of Europe with troops. But if it gets farther into the medieval background of these stories, that might be interesting. I don't know yet. I hope the board game is good. Just because you can do a good RPG doesn't mean you can do a good board game, but maybe it will. Black Box is a game called Itchy Monkey, The Battle of Lice. Okay, that's kind of funny, right? It's an area control game. Now, both the games that these guys have done on Kickstarter before, Revenge of the Dictators, and the other one that they've done, the Frutte Mari game, neither one of those games really drew me in. I thought the themes of both those games were interesting, but the games were not good. And so, third time's a charm, hopefully. We'll find out. Tiny Ninjas. Now, this game is really getting a lot of buzz. Tiny Ninjas Battle in the Box. It's a 2-player head-to-head dice rolling game with push-your-luck aspects to it, and Tiny Ninjas, and you play in the box, and their page is full of positive reviews from people, all kinds of things. Get a fancy box, small box. I mean, for how small the game looks, there's certainly a lot on the Kickstarter page. And I wonder if this might be like a breakout hit type thing. Like, ooh, have you played Tiny Ninjas? Funhill is making a game called Wisdom of Solomon. Several years ago, I did a preview for their first game, Kings of Israel, which I liked. It almost had a pandemic feel cooperative game. This one here is a worker placement and network building game set in Solomon's kingdom. I like biblically based games, and so very interested to try this one out. And finally, Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea there's a Kickstarter for a new expansion, Pestilence, and as the second edition of it if you want. Also, there's some cool painted miniatures that you can get, although I'm still trying to figure out how to pledge just for the painted miniatures on the project. But there's two new factions, birds, basically, birdmen and mermen. And so that's two more factions. There already is, I think, 8, so that brings the total factions to 10. Also, a lot more miniatures and heroes and things like that. I really love the original game and the expansion, so I'm always glad to see more. Anyway, that's what I have in the Kickstarter news. Let's move on.
Hi, and welcome to another FOMO, the segment where I take a look at a game that's seeking crowdfunding right now, and I'm feeling a little bit on the fence whether or not I'm going to miss out on this game or not, and maybe you've taken a look at it as well. Today, I'm going to take a look at Last One In. Last One In is a card game for 2 to 4 players where you'll be taking on your opponent and try to rescue 50 civilians in the process. The twist here is that you can also win the game by simply overrunning your opponent with 100 zombies as well. In order to rescue civilians, you will need to find buildings to hold them, which will have a capacity that must be filled before being considered a safe house. On a player's turn, they will follow a set of steps, completing each if they are willing and able to do so. First, the player may place out a new building card in front of them. You may only have one open building in front of you, though, at a time. Then the player will either choose cards from the town square, the cards that are currently face up in the middle, or they will draw cards from the face down draw pile. The number of cards they can select for either option they choose is determined by the open building they currently have in front of them. Next, the player may rescue civilians. To do this, you simply play a civilian card from your hand onto your open building. The building must have room for the civilian number on the card, and it must not push the building over its capacity. Some civilians have abilities that may be triggered during this. If it results in a building meeting its capacity, then the building is now considered safe and is moved to the safe zone and can no longer have its civilian count changed. Then the active player may attack their opponent with a zombie card by playing a card from their hand into their opponent's zombie horde area. Some zombies, like civilians, have abilities that can trigger, causing the other player to potentially take on more zombies than the single card. Beware though, because your opponent may be able to decoy and deflect this zombie back into your own horde if they have the card to do so. After this, the player may play from their hand a neutralization card. These cards can be used to either remove civilian from opponent's open building or reduce zombies in your zombie pile. Tokens are provided in the game for keeping track of leftovers. Finally, the player ends their turn by discarding down to 6 cards if they are over the hand limit. Cards discarded this way are sent to the player's zombie horde and count towards their zombie count. Building cards may never be discarded. The game continues back and forth like this until either a player reaches 50 civilians in their safe area or until their opponent has 100 zombies in their zombie horde, in which case they are the winner. So that's a brief overview of Last One In. Now that was a review copy, as you probably noticed, and they were kind enough to send it to me. Now, as to the gameplay itself, this game had something going for it that I love right away. I love multifunction cards. I've mentioned it several times. And this game has plenty of that going on. You've got cards that are both zombies or civilians. You've got cards that can neutralize zombies or civilians. Everything is very dual purpose. Now there are cards that are single function, but I really did enjoy that. But the thing that I probably enjoyed the most in this game is the fact that you have to manage your hand. Especially, you're making that decision at the start of your turn whether or not you're going to choose cards from the town square or draw cards. And that's going to give you a different number of cards. But at the end of your turn, if you've got more than 6 cards, then those cards that you have to discard are going to end up in your zombie horde. And weirdly, that felt thematic. It felt like you didn't have the resources to deal with the number of people, and so inevitably they turned into part of the zombies as well. And there's a really high degree of take that in this game that I enjoy. If you don't like take that, this is not a game for you. As to the theme, it's zombies. If you're not into zombies, or maybe that feels a little tired to you, then maybe this isn't a game for you. But I really did enjoy the back and forth take that. However, I will say the first time I played this game, not so much. and I couldn't figure out why until I realized we just hadn't shuffled the deck very well. And so there were some of those specialized civilians we just never saw, such as the recruiter and the ninja. When we reshuffled the deck and played the second time, I enjoyed this so much more, but it's because I do enjoy Take That. Now, they did try to kickstart this game once before unsuccessfully. This is a relaunch, and for me, this is going to be a game that I think that I want to have in my collection. It's got a relatively low price point, and I really do enjoy it as a simple 2-player Take That game. The rules do have a 3 and 4 player version that we tried out. I personally would never recommend them. I just didn't enjoy them. There's a team play and a 1v-all. Just not my cup of tea. I think the sweet spot for this game is really as a 2-player game. If you're interested and you think this is a game that you maybe don't want to miss out on, because I have a feeling this is the type of game that may never see retail, then go ahead and check out their Kickstarter page, and I look forward to seeing you folks next episode.
I was just at the UK Games Expo, and one of the things that we found there is that there's a lot of Kickstarter people there showing off a game that's on Kickstarter or coming soon to Kickstarter. And it's something I noticed there last year. It's at a lot of conventions. The bigger conventions like Essen and Gen Con don't have as much room for Kickstarters, but smaller conventions like Origins, UK Games Expo, there's a lot of people who pay the money to have a booth for Kickstarter. And one of the things that I found frustrating was I would go there and be like, oh, you have this is an interesting sounding game. Oh, it's not on Kickstarter yet? Okay, well, wait. Then it comes out on Kickstarter, you go back the following year, and they're not there. I'm like, oh, well, that's it. I want to see the final product. And it's not, for me, it's not as interesting going to a convention where a good chunk of the booths do not actually have product to buy. I mean, technically you can buy it. I guess you can go on Kickstarter and back it, and you'll get it eventually. And that's not saying anything bad about these conventions. It's just that I noticed that this proportion of booths where, hey, the game's coming out soon, seems to be getting higher and higher. And it makes sense to actually go to a convention. It's a way to just show people the game. They have a better idea of understanding it. I just find it odd that they don't come back. So I mentioned this to somebody at the convention when I was there, and they said, well, maybe that's all the people did. They had a dream. They wanted to get their game published, so they come to a convention, they show it off, they get the game published, and they're done. I guess that's true. I can see that. It doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense that once you get it out there, you'd want to continue to sell it, but maybe these people don't want to continue to sell it. Maybe they don't want to have a booth. But I was wondering what you guys think about that. When you go to a convention and you find a bunch of booths there, and you go to booth after booth, and it's like, game's not out yet, game's not out yet. Do you like that? Do you thrive on that? Like, hey, here's a chance to try out all these different Kickstarters. Here's a chance to try them before I buy them. Is that something you're looking for? Or does it kind of annoy you because you're like, oh, I was kind of interested in that, but I'm not willing to wait a year or a year and a half before I get this game? And so when you see a Kickstarter stand at a convention, does that make you interested, or does that turn you off and you're looking for things you can get right then? Let me know in the comments.
Hi, this is Jamie from Stonemeyer Games, and today I'm going to talk about language independence and worldwide accessibility. Something that I tried to think about when I ran Kickstarter campaigns was, how can I make this accessible to as many potential backers as possible? Not just English speakers, not just people in the US. And as a result, what ended up happening is I would have about 50% of backers that were from the US, and then 50% from all around the world. Now, part of that was shipping. I talked about shipping in a previous video. Shipping and fulfillment, if you can make that friendly to backers worldwide, then you significantly increase your potential audience. But another part is language. Not everyone speaks English fluently, or even if they do, even if they are comfortable with English, they might prefer their local language version of the game. So there are a few different approaches you can take to helping reach out to those types of backers. The first is to make your game language independent. What this means is that all of the components except for the rule book itself in the game are language free. And so it just uses symbols and icons and pictures to convey what you're trying to express to the gamer. This can be great. It can be easy to see icons and symbols from across the board, just from a playability perspective. But it can also isolate people who maybe get tired of constantly looking in the rulebook to see what those symbols mean. So you kind of have to strike a good balance there. The second approach that you can take, sometimes in combination with that first one, is to get volunteer translations of your rulebook and of your game. So this is something, if you do have people who are passionate about your project, either before or during the project, you could ask them or pay them a small amount or compensate them with a copy of the game to translate the rulebook into a different language. This can be really appealing for backers who arrive at your project page and see that you've not only taken the effort to put the English rulebook up there, but also to have the Italian rulebook and the German rulebook and the French rulebook. That can be really helpful, even if they're just making a backer decision at that moment. The last option is localization. You can partner with publishers around the world to have your game published in a local language, in German, and French, and Italian, and Japanese, many other languages. This can be a huge asset for a game, and especially the long-term visibility of a game, the breadth of the game, the breadth of the game's audience. But the downside is if you try to pair printings of games together, English with those other languages for economies of scale, you can often be caught like waiting for all these localization partners to be ready with their translations, whereas you're ready to go to print with the English version. So you kind of have to decide, how do I want this to impact the schedule of the project, especially if you have backers waiting to get their copy of the game. You may want to just proceed with the English printing, and then a few months later proceed with the international, the localized versions. Also, one thing to keep in mind, something that I learned, is that localization partners actually prefer that the game isn't language independent, because it means that the marketability of their language dependent version of the game is much higher, since someone can't just go and buy the English version of the game with all the symbols and icons and download the rulebook in a different language. So that can be something to think about as well. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to visit my Kickstarter lessons blog and we can talk about this more in detail. Thanks.
And that's it for another Crowdsurfing. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Like I said, there's a lot of weird projects I'm not that interested in Kickstarter, but there's still a lot of good ones. So, of course, we'll come back each week. Now, every time, just as a reminder, every time people say you didn't mention this project or this project, I don't do every project that's currently available each time I do this. I do it every other week. So I make sure that I cover everything that's going to end before the next Crowdsurfing. So there's a chance I'll talk about some of the bigger stuff next time. Either way, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.